All right, so before I dive in, what we're gonna do this evening, I just put a link back into the chat. It's a link for a mural board. I'm sure many of you have been playing around with new tools, virtual whiteboarding tools, etc. We certainly have been at Agile Velocity. I'm not an expert in mural, but I'm getting there. Although I do have our resident expert on the Zoom, so I can always lean on him if need be. But I decided just to kind of try something a little bit different tonight, rather than show you guys a traditional PowerPoint. Normally, you know, we all like to do things in person and get tactile and interactive. So I decided rather than have a PowerPoint slide just to walk you guys through, because that's kind of boring, I put the content into the mural. And so we'll play around with it. I'll kind of step you through the content. And I've got a couple of so-called activities that we'll do. Nothing fancy, just thought as we go through, we'll have some opportunities to have some conversations. As Marie mentioned, as we were getting started, we'll create some breakout groups. As the numbers keep growing, I see we're up to like 29 people. Take me out, that's 28. So, you know, we'll get a few breakout groups going throughout the session. And I quickly just now created a second activity area just so people aren't stepping on each other. And kind of similar to what Marie just shared with us on Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So for those of you that may not be familiar with Mural, I'm going to share my screen and give you a quick kind of overview of kind of how it works. And everybody should find it's quite intuitive, but hopefully you can use the anonymous link, you can get in. So if everybody can see my screen, just want to point out a couple of things. So one thing about Mural, it's a virtual canvas. It has kind of the ability to zoom in, zoom out. So over here in this area of your screen, you should see this zoom pane. You'll notice that there's a hand. So if you click on the hand, it puts you in pan mode. And now you can just kind of slide stuff around if you choose to. If you click on it again, if it's clear, your cursor is free moving. But there's a plus button here, there's a minus, so you can zoom in, you can zoom out. Down at the bottom, you should see some icon that represents you. I see some people are on. I'll just hover over my icon, and as a facilitator, I have a few extra things here. But for example, I've got highlighted here so that my cursor is being broadcast, so you can see it. You can hide cursors if you choose to. Sometimes it gets a little crazy with all these cursors flying around. But as you hover over your icon, you can kind of get the ability. You can edit your name, by the way. If you want to put your actual name in there, feel free. But you can decide whether you want to see your cursor or not. On the left-hand panel, all the way over here, you notice there's some images. So the first one I'll click. If you click on any of these, it expands a little sub-panel. And the most common ones are using either if you want to put text in, or use of stickies. Now in the activities area, I'll show you in a minute, I pre-populated a few stickies, but I'm gonna have you guys, I'm gonna zoom over here, and I'm gonna see if this works. I'm gonna summons you all to my area. So you should be able to see this little practice pane. So if you wanna just, you can grab a sticky off the panel as such, and you can drop it in. You can type text right into the sticky. You can scale the size, etc. And you can also just double click on the area, as you just saw me do. So as you double click on the area, it'll automatically create a sticky for you based on whatever the last one was. And again, you can kind of put text in there. If you accidentally create a sticky, don't worry about it. You can simply click off of it, click back on, delete it. If you do click on it, you'll notice up here at the top, you can change your colors if you choose to. You can change the font size. This little move icon here allows you to kind of move it around nice and freely. Now you can move other people's stickies. So if you start getting into a sticky battle with someone, just do that at your own peril. There are some other things in here. This star, if you notice here, is a cool little feature. They've got icons that are built in. So let's say somebody puts a sticky here. I see this hello world. I like that one. So I'm gonna drag the check mark over there. So just to indicate that I really like that one. Or maybe I thought that was a good idea. So you're not limited to these in the search button. You can search anything. So I like dogs. So you search for dogs, you can put something in, you can drag icons. So as we're going through, we're not gonna do a lot of this, but as you're having conversations, I'll ask you to put some information in stickies, put your ideas in stickies. We all know how to do that. We're all Agilists, right? But also if you see somebody else's sticky that you like, you could put an icon on it. You could do all sorts of fun stuff. There are other features. I won't go into all of them, but those are the two main ones I like to point out. Is the first one at the top, you can create text, comment boxes, or put stickies. And then the star, again, will open up the panel for the icons. Okay? Also over on the right-hand panel is an outline that you should be able to see. And I will open up elements of the navigation panel as I'm stepping through the content for this evening. Okay, so I'm going to pause real quick. Anybody having any difficulty with Mural? Everybody able to see things? If you are having an issue, again, as Marie and Nancy said, if you just want to put a comment into the chat, then they can bring it to my attention and we can go from there. Okay, I'll leave the screen sharing on just for a minute, but once I get into this, I'll probably turn screen sharing off so that it's easier for me to kind of be able to focus on you guys in the gallery and that sort of thing. All right, so.
I have a quick question, Richard.
Sure.
Is Mural available? Like, is it a free tool? Do you have to buy it?
So they do have a free version.
Okay.
And you can also license. So they have enterprise licenses. They have small team licenses. We actually use at Agile Velocity, we're running a parallel experiment. We use Mural and Miro, which is a competing tool. Mm-hmm. And so we have what's referred to as a consultant network license, which allows us in the organization, we're coaches and trainers. So it allows us to do our workshops. We do a lot of collaboration ourselves in this tool. And as you can see, for sessions like tonight, it's a cool little feature to be able to just anonymously invite people in and allow people to collaborate. So it's a pretty nifty tool. And again, a competing tool is called Miro, M-I-R-O, that we're also experimenting with.
Cool, great, thank you.
Right, you bet. All right. So like I said, I'll keep sharing my screen just for a minute as we get started. But just real quick introduction. I briefly introduced myself. In addition to being on the Agile Denver board, I am an enterprise coach and trainer with Agile Velocity, which is based in Austin, Texas. But as you can see in my moniker here in the Zoom, I'm based in Sedalia, Colorado. So I live out in the country, about 35, 45 miles, a little bit southwest of Denver. I won't bore you with my full Agile history, but I've been practicing Agile for about 20 years now. And my first official formal introduction to Agile was way back in 2002. I was dabbling at the time, and then I took on a big project with what used to be Quest Communications downtown. And they had just started their Agile journey with extreme programming, XP. And short story was I found it to be amazingly effective. The team I was working with, we launched our product faster than we thought we would. It was just a great experience. And I really got hooked back then on everything I could do to learn more about Agile, and then I got into Scrum, et cetera. I got into coaching probably about 10 years ago, and I see Per on the Zoom this evening. Hey, how's it going, Per? So I worked with Per and a group of others, again, about 10 years ago, back at Health Grades. Yeah, a long time ago, wasn't it, buddy? So I started coaching about 10 years ago, and I'm very passionate, as all of us probably are, about Agile. I'm not a zealot. get very dogmatic about it. I'm actually quite pragmatic. I try to be quite pragmatic about these things, which is a really good segue into the talk tonight. The topic that we have tonight is called STATIK, B for Scrum Teams. And some of you may be familiar with STATIK. It's an acronym. It stands for Systems Thinking Approach to Implementing Kanban. And so maybe you're wondering, well, why am I going to talk about Kanban and Scrum Teams all at the same time? Because I'm a pragmatist. I've been working with teams for many, many years, as I said, and over the years, I've seen a lot of opportunities with Scrum teams that they kind of struggle out of the gate for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. And I've been practicing Kanban for a number of years as well, and I'm a huge Kanban fan. I think it's a fantastic method. So I try to figure out ways to take the best of what I learn and what I experience and kind of munge them together and see what is valuable. To be clear, as I'm stating here on this second paragraph, this is not about Scrum-ban, right? So what we're going to talk about tonight is how do we use this specific technique called STATIK, which is a multi-step process, but we use it maybe in a slightly different context. We might not need to use it just because we're going to be using the Kanban method. And again, I've experimented over the years with teams to be able to figure this out. And I see another former colleague of mine, Daniel Lin. So Daniel and I work together many times and use this method together. So STATIK, again, is a great technique to implement Kanban, and I found it to also be a pretty useful technique to what I refer to as charter a new Scrum team. Or we could also use this to reorient an existing Scrum team. So what I'm going to talk through tonight is mostly oriented around standing up new Scrum teams, but I'll sprinkle in some ideas and we'll talk about some differences and variances of, maybe you're not standing up a brand new Scrum team, maybe you've got a Scrum team that you're working with and you just need to do some reorientation or some reforming, or you need to kind of get back to kind of understanding, what are we doing and why are we doing it? The thing I like to also point out as I get into it, notice here in this fourth paragraph, for the purposes of this topic, I'm going to be referring to what I call lowercase Kanban, which is, the visibility, right? How do we create a system so that we can see the work that we're doing? I am specifically not talking about uppercase Kanban, meaning the Kanban method. Okay, so if anybody gets confused about that, or if you want to challenge me on that, feel free, we can have that dialogue. So what I'll be talking about, you'll hear me use the word Kanban system throughout this session. And what I'm talking about is the system for the team to create the visibility, to manage the flow of the work, and to kind of be able to deal with change that's going on. And I think this is a really important need for Scrum teams as well, and how they can think about that. Okay. So over here in the STATIK content area, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit for you guys. This first slide, as I mentioned, rather than do a normal slide preso, I just put some of my slides into this bureau. So this is kind of an overview of how I have adapted STATIK specifically for a team chartering type of event. It's not a huge variation, but there are some variations that I'll do my best to kind of let you guys know of. But basically, STATIK is a multi-step process, and it's generally executed in a workshop format, but it's a way to kind of step through as a team and essentially analyze, evaluate, discover the things that we need to be able to start to execute as a team, which is again why I think it's a perfectly valid technique to be able to use with Scrum teams as well. And you can see here in the steps. So step one is called fit for purpose. So we talk about, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Do we understand why we're being formed as a team? Step two, we talk about what are some of the sources of dissatisfaction, meaning what are the problems that we need to solve? What are our pain points? What are our customers telling us? Step 3, we start to analyze demand. And I'll be walking you guys through these in a little bit more detail. I'm just giving you a high-level overview here. But analyze demand is about, where's the work coming from and how frequently does the work come to us, those sorts of things. Step 4 is about analyzing our capacity or our capabilities, right? Are we capable of doing the work that we're being asked to do, and what are the skills and capabilities that we need? Then we start to actually model the workflow. Now this is an area, I'll explain it later, but I'm sure everybody raised their virtual hands. I'm guessing everybody's done some form of workflow mapping or process mapping in your work. So this is something that we all know how to do. I'll talk later about some interesting things that I've learned in facilitating this with people. But I see this with Scrum teams for sure is, we stand up a Scrum team and we agree that we're going to use Scrum, and we talk about, well, we have to have a sprint, right? And sprint's going to be 2 weeks, and I'll be the Scrum Master and you'll be the product owner, and here's the development team. And then we get our other ceremonies defined, but we often don't just talk about, well, how do we actually do the work? We just assume that, Scrum's going to do all of that for us, and I find that it doesn't. So modeling the workflow I found to be really important, particularly in a collaborative setting, to really start to surface and uncover some important aspects of how we're going to work together. Once we do that, we can define what's called classes of service, and then we ultimately design our Kanban system. And then the final step is officially to roll it out, socialize it, etc. And again, you notice an adaptation I have here is called team priming. It's a little activity that Daniel Lynn and I co-created several years ago to make sure that teams are ready to go. So I'm going to walk you guys kind of through this overview, and I'll expose some sessions. But before I do, I'm going to kind of navigate over here to the right a little bit. And again, kind of summons everybody to my area. Let's see here. We've got, how many people do we have on the call so far? About 30 people?
Looks like we have, yeah, about 30. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
That includes the 3 of us.
Right.
Okay.
So 27.
Well, I'll tell you what. So for this first activity, I'm going to take a gamble and let's just do it all in the same space. But if it gets too messy, then as we go forward, we'll split. I did create a second activity area if we need to. But as we get into this, I'm going to ask Marie or Nancy, one of the two of you, to go ahead and start queuing up some breakout rooms in Zoom. Mm-hmm. We've got 30 people, so maybe, I don't know, 5 breakouts with whatever number of people, excluding maybe myself, and you guys are free to jump into breakouts if you'd like. Mm-hmm. But you'll see here in this first activity area, I've just posted a question that I'd like for you guys to think about. So what are some of the challenges that you guys have experienced either forming or reforming a Scrum team? And just to kind of nudge you a little bit, I put in here a couple of things that I've observed. So one of the things that I've observed that kind of led me to doing this is that a lot of times there's some unnecessary thrashing about on something that I think is somewhat trivial because I've been doing this so long. But what about the product owner role, and what's this Scrum Master role? And we have to get all these roles figured out. And sometimes management kind of creates this churn, and the team gets kind of caught up into that and gets a little stressed out. And other times we see teams just kind of dive in and say, well, we're going to start doing Scrum because we were told we needed to start doing Scrum. So not to influence your thinking, I see a lot of people starting to grab some ideas and go. But what I want you guys to do is, if we're going to put you into some breakout rooms, give you 5 quick minutes, but just have a conversation with your breakout room mates and talk about what are some of the patterns that you've seen, either forming new Scrum teams or maybe the need to reform a Scrum team, and what are some of the things that you observed. And as you're having that conversation within your breakout rooms, I see a lot of you already doing that, just jot your ideas into a sticky so that the greater group, we can see that. And when we come back out of the breakout room, we'll have maybe a real quick, debrief and kind of see what some of the ideas are. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. All right, everybody, keep their fingers crossed. Ready? hopefully.
I see people going away.
Yay, bye. No. Bye-bye. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm going away or not. Let's see, let's see, who do we have?
So looks like Pear, Linda, Asha, John.
So that didn't happen. Okay, so hold on.
Add them to just any of the breakouts.
Yeah, I probably should put in. I don't know how to get them in there. Let's see. For some reason, they weren't put in. Linda, Linda, can you go off mute for me?
Can you just add them to another breakout? Can you just create a new breakout for them?
I don't see the option at the moment because it's in progress.
Okay. And how much time did you put 5 minutes on the breakout?
5 minutes, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. So for those of you that aren't in a breakout, we can just call this a breakout. So feel free to unmute and kind of share your thoughts or experiences on the topic.
Boy, where do you begin? Probably the time I probably spend the most time talking with people about sizing.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know, well, how many hours are in a point, or how many days is 3 points, and that whole line of thinking. And takes a while, but eventually, sort of. People seem to get the idea, and then with practice, it tends to make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just ask a quick technical question?
Sure.
It looks like everyone has been assigned a room, but you guys did not join it. You choose not to join, or you didn't see a message, or what? Because it looks like you didn't join. So, Pratif, you're one of them.
I didn't. Right. I specifically did not join. But
okay, Pratif, did you see a message that allowed you to join?
I clicked on the link in the chat. That's all I saw.
So we're talking about the breakout room within the Zoom.
Oh, I haven't seen anything for that.
So that's interesting, because the people that are left over, it says that they didn't join. Okay. So I'm not sure why. So anyhow, keep going with the conversation.
We'll try it again. We'll try it again.
Yeah, no time. So yeah, I was just kind of curious. Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Anyone else who's listening in have some thoughts on some challenges that you've seen forming or reforming teams? And again, feel free to be putting some thoughts and notes into the mural board as well.
Well, my last job as a Scrum Master was definitely an interesting experience. They wanted somebody to come in, and they already were doing Scrum. But so as we, so we started like working on a lot of different areas that I thought the team needed to work on. But it really came down to the executives really weren't ready to make changes that were needed to get done. That was the bottom line. Sure, they can do the developers every 2 weeks. They're required to get things done, but the test team, that's all waterfall, that kind of a thing. So then once the work got done, this is what I walked into. Once the work got done, then you had to get scheduled someplace down the next 2 or 3 months where the test team, who was doing everything manual, were able to address that work. And I was like, no, the team is everybody. So then we were trying to go through that, and they were like, they thought I was kind of crazy. But it was interesting. But yeah, and I guess from executive down, they just weren't willing to make the investment that was needed to happen so that the QA could be part of the team.
Yeah.
And that was the problem. So that was the biggest problem we had.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sadly a common one, right? Of there's this declaration, all right, we're gonna quote do Scrum, and we're gonna create these Scrum teams, but yet the teams really aren't given the environment succeed. And it could be, in your example, because waterfall is such a, a deep thing in these organizations, or something like that Per mentioned, right? And so the key point of that is teams need to be able to discover that and expose that up front, if possible, as either a constraint or something that they're going to have to be able to navigate around or build into their way of working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Our breakout rooms are closing.
Good. Looks like some groups. Everybody's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing some pretty typical common anti-patterns. So product owner, some product owner related items, product owner as a delivery manager, calling team Scrum, but still operating in a waterfall fashion, misaligning on purpose and vision, some prior bad experience with Scrum. Yeah, sometimes we get a little jaded or tainted. Lack of safety, lots of silence. Taco Scrum and waterfalling. Great. So feel free to keep putting your ideas there. So we all have seen some form of an anti-pattern, some form of challenge, whether it's forming new teams or not. And to be clear, right, there's no magic pill that's going to fix that stuff. But one of the things that I've found is, if we give space to the teams to have this opportunity to have these conversations, to do this analysis, to really then take that and then start to shape their way of working, while it doesn't remove all of those challenges that we're seeing emerge here, it may dampen down a few, and maybe more importantly, it allows them to design their working system, aka their Kanban system, in a way that either acknowledges or somehow mitigates some of those challenges. So I'm going to kind of step you guys through how I facilitate a workshop around static. And one thing that I'm going to start with is, one thing that I found is kind of useful is I design each step within static for the purpose of the workshop as a story, right? Because we all know how to think and write and talk about user stories. So I found it's a really good technique to be able to get people to kind of connect to that. So you'll notice I've got story one is titled Fitness for Purpose, which is step one of static. And so there's a little story here that explains what the team's doing and why they're doing it, as we're all familiar with. We have some acceptance criteria here so that we know that we've actually accomplished them. And so, this step is really about that real basic fundamental, getting the team formed, getting them understanding why were they assembled as a team. I'm sure everybody has slightly different experiences, but as an external coach, more often than not, when I go into an organization, certainly for organizations that are either getting started or early in their so-called agile transformation journey, the idea of self-forming teams is a very foreign concept, and I only see that in maybe some of the most mature organizations. So mostly what I see is people were told, all right, you're going to be on this team, right? So now go forth and do awesome work. And so we've got people that are being told that they're part of this team. They may or may not know why. As some of you noted in the first little box up there, they're being kind of told to go do Scrum, or there's this mandate, but there's not a whole lot of clarity as to why are we doing this and what this means to us. So I think it's important to use kind of that first step of static to get people connected to why are we here, what is our purpose, and are we fit for that purpose? And what that really means is do we have the right people, and do we understand what, who our customer is? Do we understand kind of what we're doing and how we're going to do it? So some simple techniques I would do at this stage would be, I would, do some lightweight exercises to get the teams talking about their mission statement, to get them maybe even come up with a cool team name. A lot of times I work with teams and they're like, yeah, we're the X application team, or we define ourselves by the work that we do. And that's not very exciting, and it doesn't really give the team a sense of ownership or an identity. So we do some of that work, which is sometimes fun and important. Then we'll also start talking about, again, well, what are our norms and our values? We know with Scrum, we have a clear set of values, and we need to get the team understanding those values, and we need to get the teams understanding the, if you will, the norms of Scrum, AKA the ceremonies and the heuristics that are built into the Scrum framework. For example, well, we have the daily Scrum, and the heuristic around that is it should be about 15 minutes, and it's an opportunity for the team to synchronize and be accountable and inspect and adapt their daily plan. So getting them anchored and connected to those norms and really buying into that is important. Another thing that I would do at this level was we would do some stakeholder mapping, right? Who are our stakeholders? Who are our customers? Who are our contributors? Are the stakeholders internal or external? We can do all sorts of levels of that stakeholder mapping. And I find this is really valuable, number one, because it really would amaze me if teams don't understand who their customers are and who they are delivering for. And the flip side of that is who might they be dependent on for that delivery. So we talk about stakeholders and understand some of the dimensions of their stakeholders. And that can even include, which will go into how they design their Kanban system, will include, depending on some of the characteristics of the stakeholder, meaning are they internal or external, are they a consumer or a contributor, et cetera, it can shape how the team defines that working relationship. Right? So how frequently do we need to be engaging with these stakeholders? Are we going to be talking to them on a daily basis? Do we even have direct access to them? Or do we just need to keep them informed, at the end of, we'll invite them to our sprint reviews and that's all we need to do. So getting them understanding that at this first step is crucial. And as I've said before, this is a bit of an adaptation of static in the pure sense, but it gets them start to thinking of, how are we going to operate as a team? The second story, you just scroll down a little bit. So story number 2 starts talking about sources of dissatisfaction. So what are our pain points? Now there's 2 basic dimensions that I'm going to cover here. And the first one might be obvious to everybody is, what are we hearing from our customers? What are our customers telling us? And if we set up for step number 1, if we have figured out who our customers are and we know whether or not we have direct access to them, now we can go have those conversations. In the context of a workshop, when I ask this question, unfortunately, a lot of times I get, I don't know, we don't really hear directly from our customer. We have a product owner who tells us stuff. So if we can, what I'll do is I'll say, well, how about we just set up a quick survey and we survey our customers, and we can do that in real time. And while maybe that goes off and we're waiting for some data to come back, the team can continue to work. Certainly if they're internal customers, that should be pretty easy, right? We should be able to do some sort of internal poll or internal survey, or maybe we just get up out of our seats and go walk and have a conversation with them. If we don't have direct access to the customer, or the customer is truly external, we might need to get creative and find other ways to gather that data. But I think it's really crucial at this stage, as you're forming new teams, that they understand what the customer is looking for and what the customer might be dissatisfied with or otherwise satisfied. Now, the other dimension is the team themselves. Now, if this is an existing team, they could be an existing team but new to Scrum, so they're being formed as a Scrum team, or they could be an existing Scrum team. So the obvious question that I would ask as far as the team goes is, well, what did you guys talk about in your last retro? And hopefully it's not crickets, right? It's like, oh, well, we don't do retros. They were too difficult, so we just quit doing them. But hopefully there's some data from a recent retrospective. If not, we'll do a retro right then and there. Now, in this context, I tend to use, as you can see in the text that I have associated this, I tend to use a version of the sailboat retro, if everybody's familiar with that. Luke Holman, I think, is the creator of that. My personal way of doing it, I do the speedboat retro, only because I've gotten pretty good at drawing a speedboat on a flip chart. If anybody's not familiar with the sailboat or the speedboat retro, it's a metaphorical way of exploring what propels the team forward, what's holding the team back. Do we have clear line of sight to our vision? And you can add other elements to us. You know, what are the risks that we're facing? You could metaphorically reference those as sharks in the water or rocks, those sorts of things. I love this particular technique of retro because it's so visual and creative, and it creates a different type of cognitive thinking for the team members. If the teams have been doing retros, it's not uncommon that they do the traditional what worked well, what didn't work well, and what are we going to improve. And they may have done that time and time and time again, and now it's just this, routine, uninteresting, not valuable activity. So in the cases where I feel like we need to do a retro now, just so that we can surface some of these sources of dissatisfaction and pain points, I will almost always choose the speedboat or the sailboat retro. There are other metaphorical ways to do that, and maybe some of you have some cool, clever techniques that you want to share. Feel free to pop them into the chat. But this really gets the team, again, anchored on what problems are we trying to solve, and do we understand, again, the nature of the work that we're going to do and why we're doing that. I will go ahead and take this as an opportunity to pause. Nancy or Marie, is there anything that's popped up into the chat yet that anybody has a question about or comment?
No, it doesn't look like anything is in the chat room.
All right. Okay, so, well, moving right along. So if you scroll down to the next section, so story 3, aka step 3 of STATIK, is referred to as analyzing demand. So this is about the team really talking about and understanding where is the demand coming from. Now, again, with Scrum teams, the obvious answer is, well, obviously work comes from our product owner. Product owner puts items in our backlog, they prioritize for us, and we just pull that work. That may be technically true in Scrum, but I think it's important that the teams really understand where the demand is coming from. So analyzing demand is about understanding where's it coming from whom, but I also like to talk about what is the frequency of demand. In Kanban, it's referred to as rate of delivery, or delivery rate, or arrival rate, I'm sorry. So how frequently is stuff coming to us? Does stuff pop into our backlog on a daily basis, or does it come to us, kind of slow trickle, and it, we're able to see that backlog and that sort of thing. The other thing is to evaluate what type of work is coming to us. I'm sure you've all worked with different types of teams. Most commonly with Scrum teams, they're developing some form of a product. In some cases, they may also be having to support that product in production. They may be working on 2 products. Again, virtual raise of hands, how many of you are either on a team or work on a team where either you're working on multiple products, or worse, you're on a team together, but you may be working on different projects or with different teams, right? So I see a couple of hands come up into the Zoom, right? So this is important to understand. So if I'm on a Scrum team A, but maybe, unfortunately, I'm also on Scrum team B or some other team, I'm getting different demand that my team members on team A might not be aware of, right? So this is an opportunity right out of the gate for us to expose that and understand that. So understanding where's the demand coming from, how frequently does it come to us, what type of work is coming at us, which we'll talk about how we deal with that later, and then any other things that might impact the way we work, okay? And again, just too often teams just take it for granted. It's like, well, product owner is going to create a backlog and we're going to do what the product owner tells us. And this really gives them the opportunity to evaluate that and connect to that work. And I'm intentionally kind of keeping a brisk pace here, but again, by all means, put any questions or raise your hands, and we'll try to capture your questions as we go.
We do actually have a question just now. How to determine demand for a new team?
Right. So Great question. So if it's truly a brand new team, we're starting from scratch, that is probably a big unknown. But the intent, going back to, again, if you're not already there, scrolling back up to story 3, the intent here is to have that conversation as a team and then to do that analysis. So the team may not know explicitly or immediately what that is. If you need to bring other stakeholders, managers, et cetera, into the room, this is an opportunity to do that. Hopefully, if we are being formed as a new Scrum team and we have a product owner, hopefully the product owner has some awareness of who those key stakeholders are. Remember, step 1 above was to let's talk about our stakeholders and who our customers are. So that should set the stage for it. But certainly any unknowable or unknown questions coming out of any of these steps, particularly this one, would be put into the team's backlog of either risks or unknowns that they would have to figure out how to address at some point. Okay. So once the teams had that conversation around demand, the next question or the next topic, we start talking about capacity or our capabilities. Now here, this is one of my favorite elements of this particular approach. Here, there's a couple of approaches that I will typically use, and it really depends on my kind of interpretation or understanding of the team. If I have a team full of extroverts, creative types, if any of you are familiar with cultural profiling, they might be in that collaborative quadrant or the adhocracy quadrant, but maybe they're extroverts and they're really creative. I might use a technique called a market of skills. And again, this is kind of like a gamification style exercise. It's really great for newly forming teams so that we get to know each other. And the cool thing about market of skills is, again, it's another metaphorical way of doing this, is so you think about, well, you're at a market, whether it's a farmer's market or a flea market, and I'm going to sell myself to you as a team member. So what do I have to sell? And the cool thing about using market of skills is, again, if you have a team that has, you know, some creativity and they want to have a little bit of fun, this is a great way to kind of do that team forming. And I might put things, you know, I might list all my technical skills, but maybe I'm also going to share something else that has nothing to do with the work that we're doing. So maybe I play an instrument. You know, I might be good at guitar, or maybe I teach guitar on the side. I don't. Maybe I have other languages that I can teach, but it's a really fun way to get teams formed, and it does hone in on, do we have the capabilities and the skills we need? Now, when I'm dealing with teams that maybe are less extroverted, I've worked with a lot of engineering teams that, you know, they're all business, and, you know, doing anything that smells fun is just, you know, don't bring that at me. So for teams that are a little less extroverted and a little bit more serious, we just dive right in and we start building what we call a competency matrix. This is a real simple exercise. I'll give you a kind of a high level understanding of it. And I'll pause real quick. After the session, I'll be making a copy of this mural and we'll share it out for everybody. I'll add a couple of elements to this just for reference. I've got a couple of images, for example, in my official talk that show some examples of this. But a competency or a skills matrix is a pretty straightforward technique. Step 1, now when we do this in person, we set up a big wall. Doing it virtually, we would use a tool like Mural. But we start by saying, what are all the skills and competencies we need to do the work we're being asked to do? Now, again, you'll notice each step of static kind of builds on the previous steps, right? So we've talked about where's the demand coming from. We've talked about what type of work it is, et cetera. So now we start talking about what are the skills that we need to do the work. And so we might put all of those up on a board, and these are going to be technical skills. But I refer to them as hard skills and soft skills. So it could be, you know, .NET development, SQL development, using particular tools, you know, project management skills, whatever the skills are. And for some teams, that's quite a long list. But once we get that list of core competencies that the team needs, then we have each person, they get a row on this board. And so, you know, I'll put my name up there. And then each person goes through and individually self-assesses on every single competency. right? Now, the trick here is we want to create safety for the team. There's no judging. We want the team to be, individuals to be honest with themselves and their team members. So for example, if I have 0 skill, well, then I'm going to put a 0, right? If I feel like I'm an expert, I might put a 5 or a 4, whatever the scale is. I've had teams that choose to use a numeric scale. I've had teams that choose to use symbols. Some specific teams that I've worked with, we also use kind of a quadrant-based circle. So if I don't fill anything in, that means I have no skill whatsoever. Maybe I fill in the first quadrant, that means I'm a novice, you know, I'm learning. Maybe I fill in 2 quadrants and I'm self-sufficient, you know, yeah, I can do this work, but you know, don't call me an expert. Maybe I fill in that 3rd quadrant and I'm, you know, I feel like I'm pretty solid. I can take on any work that might need this skill. And if I fill out the whole thing, maybe I consider myself an expert, and I can really lead that type of a work. So everybody goes through, they self-assess, and then the team steps back, and then we start looking for gaps, right? So what patterns do we see? And the gaps are usually pretty self-evident, right? So, well, we don't have a lot of strength here, but this is a core competency that we need. So how are we going to fulfill that skill set? And if there are any gaps, then we, you know, the team would follow up with management and talk about what they would need. Another cool little bonus of using this technique is I might, you know, be either a novice or maybe I have no skill in an area, and Andy might be an expert. And so the cool bonus that you get by using this technique with teams is you can create mentoring relationships. So if there's a particular skill that I'm not strong enough on, but I see somebody else is, then we get to have a conversation of, you know, would you be willing to mentor me? And what could we do to strengthen my skill set and actually build a mentoring relationship? And as we all know, we need strong cross-functional, multi-talented teams to be able to deliver in complex environments. So building that sense of knowledge sharing and mentorship so that we all kind of grow our competencies, I think is a super important aspect as you're standing up a new Scrum team or a new team of any sort. So that creates a cool little opportunity to be able to see that. And the final point on this topic is the team needs to build this into their retrospectives as well. So going forward, this is not an exercise where we do it once and we got this cool artifact and then we file that away and we just put our head down and do our work. I encourage teams to you know, iterate through this at some point and make sure that we're growing our skills as a team to be able to do the work that we're doing together. Okay. All right. Now that we've done all of that work, now it's time for us to model the workflow. And I always find this activity really, really interesting, mainly because when I'm in a group in front of a team, and I should have said this earlier, it's not uncommon when I do these chartering workshops, I might have multiple teams in the room, which also adds an interesting dynamic to all of this. But almost without fail, you know, when we get to this point, I say, all right, you know, we need to model our workflow. And, you know, does everybody understand how work flows through us in the team? Everybody's going, yeah, we already know that. Yeah, we know how we do this. And what's interesting is as soon as we start to visualize it, then we start to get these little ahas or oh shits, right? You know, it's like, wait, I didn't realize that's how you do that because I've been doing it this way. And again, we've all probably experienced that. You know, we have these preconceptions and we might have perfectly valid stuff in our head, but until we get it out and we share it collaboratively with our team members, you know, we miss those opportunities, those misalignments. So by actually collaboratively modeling our workflow, it really is important. It gets us all on the same page and it really starts to uncover some of the gaps, the biases, the miscommunications, etc. Now, depending on the size of the group, we might do some breakouts. So we might have some folks split off and go do some mapping, and then that's a diverge type technique, and then we might come back and we converge and map this out. Now, in this particular step of the static approach, it's important not to get kind of wrapped up on perfect, right? You know, perfect is the enemy of progress, as they say, right? So we just want to be able to map it out well enough so that we know that we can start to do the work. And I'm sure we've all done some form of, again, workflow mapping in the past. We're inevitably going to have some exceptions. You know, we're going to have a ton of, well, what if this and what if that? And yeah, this happens usually, but occasionally this might happen. And so you always have to make some decisions kind of in the moment of, you know, how deep do we go? How detailed do we get? How perfect do we need to be? But in my experience, you know, if we can kind of keep that Pareto principle 80-20 rule, if we can kind of map the happy path and figure it, you know, this covers the majority of how things flow through our work, we're generally good to move on. And again, we might need to iterate through some of this and come back and see, you know, what's working and what's not working. I'm going to pause here, and we are kind of running. How are we doing on time, Marie? Are we good or?
Yeah, we have 8 minutes to 7:30, but our schedule says 7:30-ish.
Yeah.
So meaning that, you know, sometimes we have an interesting topic and want to keep moving. So
Okay.
I think for the folks that want to stay on,
Okay.
please feel free.
And we do also have a question, it looks like just popped up.
Okay, so go ahead and expose the question, and then we'll do. I set up another kind of breakout at this juncture for us to kind of talk about, you know, capacity, capability, that sort of thing. But what was in the chat?
Typically, how many steps are too many? Any thoughts on that? Workflow steps.
Steps in a workflow. Yeah, I have no idea. Honestly, you know, I would say, I guess in the context of doing this collaboratively with the team, as a facilitator, I'm trying to pay attention to, you know, the dialogue, right? If the team is just, if I can see that they're engaged and they're really uncovering important information, then I'm going to give them some latitude to keep going. If they're just kind of thrashing, then I might say, all right, do we have enough, right? It's not perfect. There's more to figure out, but could we iterate back through this later? So it's really a situational decision on what you need. I will say it this way. So as one way to kind of validate that as a team is, again, as you step back, whether it's literally from the board or virtually from the electronic board, you know, you ask yourself, and we haven't explicitly said this yet, but does this represent enough of the totality of our system so that we can identify what done looks like, right? It may not have all the detail in it, but if it is a reasonable representation of how work gets introduced into us as the team, aka our system, how that work is going to flow through, and what done looks like, then the team's generally in a good enough spot to be able to move forward. And more detail may emerge later, but you know, it's really a situational decision on does the team feel good about that level of detail.
Great, thank you.
I tell you what, just in the interest of time, we'll skip that second activity. I've got a third one just to kind of wrap up on the talk to let you guys share some ideas as a group again. Step 6, this is a pretty short one, but basically, if you're familiar with the term classes of service, it's a Kanban method term. But basically, this is, now that we've, again, stepped through to this point, the next step in STATIK is we define our classes of service. Simply put, class of service is a form of an explicit policy, and it's a way for us to identify how are we going to prioritize our work, what decisions might we need to make given the type of work that's coming in. A very common example for teams using the Kanban method is, well, how do we deal with an emergency, right? Well, we're going to create an expedite lane, and the explicit policy of that expedite lane may be that all other work stops, we swarm on getting this done, and until that thing gets to done, no one pulls in any new work, for example. That could be, now the question would be, well, what is the class of service that constitutes an expedite lane? Well, it could be a sub 1 ticket if we're a production support team, right? So I'm guessing, again, all of us have worked with teams that don't simply build new features. So it's not uncommon in my experience with Scrum teams or any other team that they may be building some new product right? So they're doing new development, but in parallel, they're also having to do production support and or ongoing maintenance. Or maybe they've got 2 products that they're working on or multiple projects that they're working on. So a class of service is one technique to be able to differentiate those. So again, just simply put, let's say we have new feature work that we have to do. We have production support that we have to be able to triage and do. And then maybe there's some maintenance work on that other product that's stable, but there's some enhancements that we have to do. Those could be an example of 3 different classes of service, right? A 4th class of service could be, well, what happens when a critical issue emerges in the middle of our sprint, right? How do we deal with that, right? One of the things that I really like about Kanban as a method is this idea of having explicit policies and making those policies visible to everybody, and then the discipline and the rigor that goes into operating according to those policies and maintaining your system. And so this is a really good example of how a Scrum team can pull in that concept of explicit policies, specifically classes of service. Because again, most Scrum teams in my experience, they think of prioritization and it's, well, whatever the product owner tells us, right? Product owner is going to prioritize stuff for us, and that's all we need to know. But there's, as we all probably experienced, there's a myriad of nuance and different variability that can go into prioritization, for example, and whether we can do that. The final statement I have here in this section is this can really help dampen down any of your teams that are suffering from the hippo or who screams the loudest prioritization technique. I'm not going to name names, but the company that I worked with, Pear, at many years ago, one of their senior executives had a propensity, and he was well-intentioned, and this has played out in many, many clients, but he was well-intentioned, but he had a propensity to go directly to some of his favorite teams and sneak in his little pet projects. And I observed him doing this and had to really work very hard to get him to stop doing that, so much so that I think he tried to fire me twice. But the team, he didn't know, but the teams were really struggling and suffering because they're not going to say no to this guy. He had a C in front of his title. And so they would just nod and say, yep, okay, we'll get it done. And a lot of this, all this under the table work was getting done and the team wasn't delivering, et cetera. So this hippo was a real problem for them. Again, there was nothing nefarious about it. There was nothing of ill intent, but it was a real problem. So with the teams, what we did is, well, let's talk about it as a team. Let's create some explicit policies and let's go talk to the stakeholders. This C-level person was one of them. And let's make sure they understand kind of the rules of the game. And this is how teams, you're going to help create and support a healthy Scrum team, I believe. All right. Step 7 is kind of the key, right? And again, this is definitely my favorite part of Static. Is now the team is actually ready to design their Kanban system. And the reason I think this is super cool is because I've seen so many teams, whether they're using Scrum or using Kanban or something else, or maybe Scrum-ban, is their step 1 is, well, let's build our Kanban board, right? And they haven't had any of these conversations. They've not done any of this analysis. They haven't exposed any of this information. So years ago when I learned Static, that was the one thing that just really clicked for me, is like, oh, wait, we don't design our system until we've gone through and we've done this work and we've had these conversations. So I just think that's the cool part of Static in general. But this is the stage where now the team can actually design their Kanban system. Now, again, I'm using lowercase Kanban here. So even though we might be a Scrum team, we still need some system to see the work, to manage the flow of that work, et cetera. Again, another virtual raise of hands. I see a lot of Scrum teams that, because they don't know any better, their Kanban system, AKA their Scrum board, is simply a to-do, doing, done, right? And how many of us have looked into doing and everything's in doing, right? So we just finished sprint planning and okay, everything gets pulled into doing, and it's, it's just, you don't really know what's going on. And unfortunately, what you get is the undone work pattern that pops up, et cetera. So we all know that Scrum was designed for complex adaptive systems or problems. So we might need a little bit more complexity into our Kanban system than a simple to-do, doing, done. And I'll be honest, my personal Kanban, that's as complex as it gets, right? I have a personal to do and I have my doing. I violate my WIP limits all the time, and then hopefully I get stuff done. But I've found for Scrum teams, it can be really valuable for them at this stage. Now they can design their Kanban system. And the other cool thing about a Kanban system is there's no right or wrong way to do it, right? It can be a series of columns. It can be a series of swim lanes. It can be all sorts of different boxes. It can be whatever the team needs it to be. Now, I say that with full understanding that we are heavily constrained by the tools that we use. So if we're using a tool like Jira or Team Concert or Rally, whatever Rally's called these days, or version 1 or target process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, unfortunately, those teams have pretty rigid templates in a lot of cases. So there's not a lot of flexibility in designing those Kanban systems in some of those cases, which is why I, even today in the forced virtual world that we have, I'm still a strong proponent that the teams, certainly in the early stages, have they might have their so-called Jira Kanban board, but they also have another Kanban board, whether it's a physical board, if they're co-located, if we ever get back to that, or it could be in a tool like Mural. The reason I advocate for this is because in the early days, the team needs to be able to experiment, right? They need to be able to change things around. And if they're limited to the official electronic version that the company has, that's a limiting factor for them. And so, I always encourage, have either a physical or an experimental Kanban board that you can just play around with, and then you can have your official board that, that's mandated. Eventually, the other one can go away, but in the early days, I think it's important that the team embrace the opportunity to experiment and change things around. And I can say that the team I work with right now, Andy can attest to this, our Kanban board has morphed a handful of times just in the last few weeks as we're learning and responding to a new way of working because of COVID, right? And so it's important that the team be able to do this. The other thing that I like to point out here, and I learned this years ago from one of my associates who's a much deeper expert in Kanban than I am, is that the Kanban system has explicit boundaries. And it's important for teams to understand that what's inside of your Kanban system is limited to what you are able to control and what you're able to do. So it's not uncommon for Scrum teams, and Marie, you shared this with me as an earlier example, maybe we're a Scrum team, but we're new to Scrum and the organization hasn't quite figured it out yet. And you know what, QA folks are in a different team, right? So what's our definition of done? If we don't have the ability to actually test and deploy our product, right, then our definition of done is not really done. It's done as we can take it. And that's what our Kanban system needs to be a reflection of the boundaries at which we have control. And anything outside of that is technically outside of our Kanban system. And if we have to then launch it over the wall and hope that the QA team catches it and doesn't find any bugs and everything is good, but often, right, what happens? That work comes back to us and it has to recycle. Well, we might need to reflect that in our Kanban system, right? And so this is the key, I think, and why I love using this technique with Scrum teams is that too often we stand up Scrum teams and they struggled enough sometimes of figuring out how do we work within this thing called a sprint and what are these ceremonies, and they don't really take the time to visualize their work and their system in a way that allows them to succeed and to thrive. And I've seen teams really accelerate very quickly in their delivery having gone through these steps. The last step I'm going to show you is kind of a bit of a adaptation for sure. The official last step of STATIK is to roll it out, to socialize it, and to experiment, right? And the little adaptation I create for the purposes of chartering new teams, including Scrum teams, is, and again, a technique that Daniel and I created called team priming. And so we've done all this work as a team, right? And it's great. We've got all these artifacts, we've got all this new knowledge, and we're ready to get working. But we may still be facing some constraints. So this is just a way to kind of pull everything together at the end of the workshop. We have them do an exercise, as you can see here in the acceptance criteria. We create a flip chart or some artifact that says, what are the tools that we need? What is the knowledge that we need? What are the environments that we need? And what are the people that we need? Because as we're stepping through static, remember we did this capabilities activity, we may identify that there's a skill set or knowledge that we don't have yet, or there are people that aren't on our team that we might need to get on the team. So this is a way to kind of pull it all together. And then we will build a backlog out of this, obviously, as we know how to do. But this generally gives the teams enough so that they can launch into the work. And as I said earlier, this is not just for newly formed teams. I've used this technique on existing Scrum teams that are struggling. Maybe they've got, again, undone work pattern, or they're storming for some reason. This is a great technique to kind of reorient them and reform them. So I know this is a really fast, quick, and dirty kind of step through to static. I'll share some other resources with you folks that might be valuable. I do want to open up, let's see here. So the final little conversation, if we can do one last quick breakout room, and I know we're going over time. So just to the right, there's an activity box for the Kanban system design and its relevance to Scrum teams. So maybe one quick little breakout room to wrap up, and then we can have some Q&A if anybody wants to stick around. But similarly, as you get into your breakout room, I've just teed up a couple of questions you might want to think about. So, how have your teams experimented with Kanban boards? If you have any cool ideas that you guys have done, and what benefits do you think you could get out of doing something like this with the team? So, Marie, if we can get everybody back into their breakout rooms real quick. So, hopefully, didn't see as many new stickies bubbling up than we did from the first session, but hopefully you guys are able to have a good dialogue. I do want to leave some space for some Q&A, but I'll just close with this. So when I started talking to Marie about what might be valuable, so I know this was kind of a quick and dirty run through of the model, but the intent was to kind of give you guys, if you weren't familiar with it, but just a glimpse into this. I know it's kind of a tactical tool to be able to use, but hopefully there was enough that feels actionable for you guys. I will reiterate, I'll take a snapshot of the mural, and I'll share that, and Marie can share that out with everybody. And my contact information, if you scroll up to the upper left corner, my contact information is in there, so feel free to reach out at any time if you want to ask questions, you want to dig deeper, you want to just brainstorm on some ideas. I'm always happy to have those types of conversations. But I'm happy to kind of open it up to the group for any Q&A for these last few minutes.
While folks are doing that, thank you again, Richard. We really appreciate you joining us this evening. We'll have to have you back. This has been a great web meetup, and we really appreciate it. And again, for Agile Denver, we always appreciate the support and sponsorship.
Well, thank you, Marie. I'm glad to be able to share my thoughts and experiences, and just staying connected to the community during times like this is really important and rewarding. So I appreciate it. And again, hopefully folks got some value out of this. And again, feel free to reach out, do your own research, experiment, and share with your teams.